What you're looking at right now, it's not a video of something, and it's not an animation somebody drew. It's math being worked out about 400,000 times a second on a desktop computer. And I know that if you're not a technical person, that probably doesn't look like much. It kind of looks like colored smoke. So let me show you the parts that surprised me. Nobody drew those letters. The program doesn't know the letters are even there. It's tracking where the fluid goes, and one little square at a time, and the letters are just places the fluid hasn't reached yet. Remember this because I'm going to come back to it. All right, so there's a lot of noise about AI right now and whether we're in a bubble. And let me be straight with you about what this is before you give me 20 minutes. First thing, this isn't financial advice, and I'm not going to tell you to buy anything, and I'm not going to tell you to sell anything. I'm not going to tell you what the market is going to do, mostly because I don't know, and neither does anybody making a video about it. Second thing, and this is actually the reason I made this one, everybody's arguing about whether the money pops. Almost nobody's asking the question I wanted answered, which is, if the money does go, what happens to the technology? Because those are two different things, and I don't think most people have them separated. A company could be worth too much and still be building something that works. And this has happened before, and we're going to look at when that has happened, and we have evidence for that. And the last thing you're going to see on screen is actual paperwork, and you could pull all of it yourself. I'll show you where. So let's start with how much money we're talking about, because I think the number is bigger than most people picture, and it's not a guess. These companies have to tell the government what they've spent. It's a form. Anybody could read it. Here's what four of them spent on buildings and equipment last year. Not projected, not estimated, filed. Amazon, $131.8 billion. Microsoft, $115.9 billion. Alphabet, $91.4 billion. Meta, $69.7 billion. Total, about $409 billion. Microsoft's year ends in June. The other three run on the calendar. $409 billion from four companies in 1 year. And 2 years before that, the same four spent about $156 billion. So roughly 2.5 times in 2 years, which isn't a normal thing for numbers that size to do. Now, careful here, because this is where a lot of coverage gets sloppy. That isn't 400 billion of AI. That's everything they built. Amazon's number has warehouses in it. It has delivery vans. None of the companies break out an AI figure. So anybody who tells you they spent 400 billion on AI is making that part up. What I can tell you is why they say they're building. Microsoft has to list its risks in that same filing, and this is their sentence, not mine. We continue to identify and evaluate opportunities to expand our data center locations and increase our server capacity to meet our evolving needs of our customers, particularly given the growing demand for AI products and services. That's them saying it in a form where a company is legally supposed to talk about what could go wrong. Okay. But here's the thing I actually care about, and the difference between a bet and a problem. Are they paying this with money they have, or they borrowed? You can work that out yourself. It's just division. Take what they spent on building, divide it by the cash the business actually threw off that year. Both numbers are in the same filing. Capital spending as a share of operating cash flow 2025, Alphabet 56%, Meta 60%, Microsoft 63%, and Amazon 94%. So Alphabet spent about 56 of every dollar the business made, Microsoft 63. And Amazon spent 94 cents out of every dollar. All four of them are still under 100, and that matters. It means so far that this is being paid out for what the businesses earn. Nobody's had to go borrow yet. But look at where they were 2 years ago. Microsoft was at 38%. Amazon was at 62%. Every one of these went up, and they went up fast, which is a part I'd want to keep an eye on. Not because a number crossing 100 means something bad happens. It doesn't on its own. But because that's the line where we're spending what we make turns into we're spending what we owe. So that thing at the top that I originally showed you, I had Claude build that in one prompt in one session, and it realistically took probably 2 minutes. If you asked a software developer to build that from scratch, you're talking about somebody who knows fluid math and knows graphics and has done it before. That's not a weekend. And that's a person with a specific skill set working for a while. I asked for it and had it running within minutes. But here's the second half, and this is the part that also surprised me. None of the math in there belongs to the AI. The equations that make the smoke move are called Navier-Stokes equations, and they're from the 1800s. Two men worked them out about 2 centuries ago. The AI didn't figure out how fluid moves. It looked up how fluid moves, and then it wrote the code that does the arithmetic 400,000 times a second. So which one is that thing? Is that a thing that's thinking, or is that a thing that's remembering very fast and putting the pieces in the right order? I don't think I could settle that for you. And I'd be careful with anybody who says they can. But you actually don't need to settle it to answer the money question, and that's what I want to get to. Because all of that, looking up the arithmetic, the 400,000 times a second, somebody is paying for it. So what happens to it if they stop? All right, so here's how I ended up thinking about it. And it's simpler than I expected once I stopped treating AI like an object. There are two piles, and they behave completely differently when the money gets tight. Pile one is stuff that's already out. The models people already downloaded. The open ones anybody can run on their own machine. The papers that got published, so the methods are public. And the prices, the fact that running this stuff got cheap is now a known thing. It's not a secret. You can't take any of that back. There's no button to push. Pile 2 is different. Pile 2 gets paid for every single year, training the next model, building the next data center, the people who do the research. That's not a thing somebody owns. That's a bill that keeps paying. So when people argue about whether AI survives a crash, I think they're arguing about two different piles and not saying which one is which. Normally, I'd have to guess at how solid pile 2 is, but something happened in this month that means I don't have to guess, and it came from the company itself. In August, OpenAI put up a post about a model they've been working on, and they said they found early signs it might be able to do serious damage in cybersecurity, their own words, and that it may hit what they call critical threshold. So they slowed it down. We wanted to take the time necessary to meet those standards, so we temporarily slowed the pace of scaling. This included a 2-week pause in reinforcement learning, RL, training on our latest models intended for deployment. Our largest planned frontier RL run remains on hold. Their largest planned run on hold. And a few paragraphs later in the same post, they say this, which I'd say is a sentence I put beside it. The capabilities of the frontier model are rapidly accelerating. Now, I want to be fair about what this is and isn't. That's not a critique saying it. That's not me saying it. That's a company that makes money when they ship, telling you they parked their biggest project and telling you in the same breath that the technology is speeding up. They also put a number on what the safety work costs them, which almost nobody does. Meeting those standards has required substantial engineering work and has incurred great cost and delays to frontier research. Our current estimates monitoring overhead at roughly 20% of the inference compute being monitored. 20%, $1.05. Going to watch a thing rather than running it. So put that together, because this is where that landed. Pile 2, the next model, the one that hasn't been built, depends on 3 things. It needs money, it needs safety work, and that's expensive. And they just told us how expensive. And it needs somebody to say yes. Pile 1 needs none of those things. Pile 1 is already on people's hard drives. And that's the whole answer to the question I asked at the start. If the money goes, it doesn't reach into your computer and it doesn't delete anything. What it reaches into is the next one. Now, is the next one actually still getting better? That's a real question, and there are people who count this properly. There's a group called Meter, M-E-T-R, that times how long a job an AI can finish on its own. They pick real tasks, they time how long a human expert takes, and then they see how big a job the model can get through. And they've been doing it for years, so there's a trend line. The trend is that the size of a job doubles about every 7 months. Since 2023, it's been faster than that, around 4 months. But I read the write-up, and they say something about their own numbers that I think you should hear, because most people quoting it skip it. These confidence intervals are still very wide. We measure human baseline times for only 5 of our 31 long 8 hours plus tasks. The remainder use estimated times. And the part of the reason the recent line looks steeper is that they went back and they rescored older models, and the older models came out lower than before. So some of that steepness is just the past moving down, not just the present moving up. That's them saying it about their own work. I trust a group that tells you that a lot more than one that doesn't. There are 2 walls people who study this keep pointing at, and both matter for Pile 2. The first is text. These things learn from writing that people wrote, and there's a limited amount of it. A group of researchers put a range on when training runs would use up roughly all of the human public writing that there is, and their range starts this year. Models will be trained on data sets roughly equal in size to the available stock of public human text data between 2026 and 2032, or slightly earlier if models are overtrained. They also say there are ways around it, so this may end up being no wall at all. I'm not going to tell you it's a wall. I'm telling you it's a date somebody serious put in writing. The second wall is concrete. Buildings take years. You decide today to spend $100 billion and you still can't have the building until the building is built. So the bigger the plan gets, the longer the wait gets, which slows the whole thing down on its own. So here's where beat 4 lands. The technology that exists is out and it's staying out. The technology that comes next runs on money, on safety work that costs real money, on permission, on text that's running low, and on buildings that take years to build. So the money question and the technology question aren't separate at all. They're the same question, and that's pointed at pile number 2. Now, I had said earlier that a company can be worth too much and still be building something real, and that we had evidence, and here it is. In 2003, a Federal Reserve Bank, the Richmond one, published a paper on what had just happened to the telephone and internet companies. Not a retrospective written 20 years later with everybody being clever. This was written while the wreckage was still smoking. And what they describe is a company building spree that went wrong in every way a spree can go wrong. By early 2001, it became apparent that massive overinvestment had taken place in the sector, particularly in the area of long-distance fiber optic cable. Here's what that looked like in money, and I'll go slow because the shape matters more than any of the figures. Companies were spending about $135 billion a year on gear at the peak. A year later, it had dropped under $93 billion. A bit over 2/3 of the year before, jobs in the industry fell by 22%. And in 2001 alone, the whole communications industry lost about $20 billion. That's a bust. Nobody argues about that. But watch what the technology did while all that was happening. In 1996, one strand of glass fiber could carry about 2.5 gigabytes a second. By 2000, the same strand could carry 100. And the Richmond Fed puts the speed of that in a way I think is worth hearing straight. Fiber's capacity to transmit data doubled approximately every 9 months between 1996 and 2000. 9 months. For comparison, the famous rule about computer chips getting faster is about 18 months. So the fiber was improving twice as fast as a thing that everybody uses as an example of fast. And then here's a bit that actually decided this episode for me. In July of 2002, which is the bottom, that's the worst of it. That's companies going under every week. The equipment maker Cisco was claiming a new record, 320 gigabits. The money had collapsed. The technology had gotten 3 times better. There is one more line in that paper, and it's the one that surprised me because it runs against the way everybody tells the story. Consumption of telecommunication services grew steadily during the boom in investment and equity valuations from approximately $88 billion in 1995 to $151 billion in 2001 in constant 1996 dollars. People kept using more of it right through the crash, $88 billion to $151 billion straight up, while the companies providing it were going bankrupt. So the money died, the technology kept getting better, and people kept using more, all 3 at once. That's not a story anybody tells, and it's in the Federal Reserve paper from 2003. Now, I'd be doing exactly what I complained about earlier if I stopped there, because if you go looking for a building spree that ended badly, you'll find one. That's easy. So let me go find one that ended fine on purpose and see what was different. I didn't have to look far. It's the same companies. Microsoft spent about $2 billion on buildings and equipment in 2010. By 2023, they were spending $28 billion. That's roughly 14 times over 13 years, and there was no bust at the end of it. That was them building the cloud. The data centers run the websites and the email and the storage that most of the internet sits on now. Huge spending spree. It worked. So the people running this one are the same people who ran that one, and they were right that time. Here's what's different, and it's the one thing I'd point at. That cloud spree grew somewhere between 15 and 40% a year, most years. This one took Microsoft from $28 billion to $116 billion in 3 years. Same company, same kind of building, different speed. I don't know what that means, and I'm not going to pretend I do. But it's the honest difference between the one that worked and the one that we're in. There's a thing that people say about this, and I've said it myself, which is that once it's out, you can't put it back in the bag. And I wanted to check that rather than just repeat it. So the fairest test I could think of is the one that technology that we actually did put a lid back on, nuclear. We didn't manage that with a speech. It's a rule, and it's still on the books, and it's one sentence. No person subject to the regulations in this part shall receive title to, own, acquire, deliver, receive, possess, use, or transfer special nuclear material except as authorized in a license issued by the Commission. Read what that actually does. It doesn't ban the knowledge. Anyone can go and read how a reactor works. What it controls is the stuff. You can't have the material without permission, and the material is hard to make and easy to count and possible to take away. That's a handle. It was on the material the whole time. There's no material here. A model is a file. Somebody already copied it, and somebody already copied that. There's nothing to license and nothing to go collect. So on that one, I think the saying holds up, and I could tell you why rather than just agreeing with it. But I don't want to leave it there because the same research turned up the other half, and I'd be shading this if I skip it. So OpenAI paused their biggest training run anyway. Nobody licensed anything. There was no material to seize. They did it themselves under their own rules with the government paying attention. So the honest version of saying is longer than the saying. What's already out can't be pulled back. There's nothing to grab. What comes next can absolutely be slowed down, and it was this month. Right, so if it does come apart, what does that do to you? Let me start somewhere you can check in about 90 seconds, because I'd rather show you where to look than tell you what to think. There is a page State Street publishes for one of the biggest S&P funds there is. It's free. It updates constantly. This is from 3 days before I wrote this. Fund top holdings as of August 21st, 2026. NVIDIA, 7.87%. Apple, 6.87%. Microsoft, 5.43%. Amazon, 3.83%. Alphabet, 3.06%. Broadcom, 2.64%. Alphabet C, 2.44%, Meta, 1.83%, Micron, 1.65%, Tesla, 1.54%. One chip company is 7.87% of that fund, and the top 10 together, it's about 37%. So if you've got a 401k and it's in the S&P 500 fund or a target date fund, which is what most workplace plans put you in by default, a chunk of your retirement is in these companies. You didn't pick that. Nobody asked you to. It's just what the fund holds. Now, how many people is that? Congress has a research office that went through the Federal Reserve's household survey, and their number is that about 54% of households have a retirement account of some kind. That also means about 46% have none at all. Now, I'd guess a fair number of you watching are in that half, so hang on, I'll get to you in a minute, because you're not out of this either. But first, for the first half, that does have an account. What does a crash actually do? We know somebody followed 4.5 million people through the last one, the dot-com crash, every year from 1999 to 2003. Same people all 4 years. From year-end 1999, near the peak of the stock market, to the year-end 2003, the S&P 500 total return index fell about 20%. The average account balance among the group of participants increased 7.1%, rising from 65,572 at the year-end 1999 to 76,809 at year-end 2003. Read those two together, because the arithmetic is strange. The market went down about 20%, but the average account went up 17%. The reason is boring, and it's the whole point. The people kept putting money in every payday, and for 3 of those 4 years, they were buying it while it was cheap. So the account got bigger, even though the prices got smaller. But an average hides people, and this one hides 2 very different ones. So here's the same 4 years, split by how old you were. The average balance of participants in their 20s rose about 138.7% between the end of 1999 and the end of 2003. For participants in their 50s with more than 30 years of job tenure, the average account balance was still down 9.3% at the end of 2003 compared with year-end 1999. Same crash, same 4 years. If you were in your 20s, your account more than doubled. If you're in your 50s and 30 years into the job, you're almost still down 10% 4 years later. So when somebody asks how bad a crash is, I think the honest answer isn't a percentage. It's a question back. How long until you need the money? One more thing about that study, because it matters and it's easy to skip. Those 4.5 million people all still have the account every year. That's who got counted. The people who stopped putting money in or cashed it out to cover something or lost a job that had the plan attached to it, they're not in that average. All right, that's if it comes apart. Now the other way, because you're in this one too, and honestly, this is a half I think gets less attention. Say nothing pops. Say it all works. What's that doing right now? There's a government agency that adds up how much the country produces per hour worked. They do it every 3 months, and they've been doing it since 1947. Here's a release from this month. The 2.1% annualized rate of non-farm business productivity growth in the current business cycle thus far is higher than 1.5% rate of the previous business cycle, and the same as a long-term rate of 2.1% since the first quarter of 1947. 2.1%, which is better than the stretch before this one, and it's also exactly the average since Harry Truman was president. So the most talked about technology of our lifetime is showing up in the national number as a normal rate. Now, I'll argue against myself because another Federal Reserve Bank looked closer and found something. Kansas City economists say output per hour has been running above where it was headed before the pandemic. And that lines up in time with these tools showing up. But their own finding is narrower than the headline anybody would write off it. And they say so themselves. The gains appeared driven by specific slices of information services and business-facing professional activities rather than being evenly spread across the entire sector. So, something real is happening in a few corners. It isn't showing up everywhere. How many businesses are actually using this stuff? The Census Bureau asks them every 2 weeks, as of May. About 1 in 5 said yes, 19.8%, and that number barely moved over 6 months. And I have to flag something because it's the kind of thing that makes comparisons wrong. Last November, the Census Bureau changed the question. It used to ask whether you used AI to produce your goods or services. Now it asks whether you use it in any part of the business at all, which is an easier yes. So if you see somebody line up this year's number against an older one, that comparison is broken and they probably don't know it. All right, last one in this beat, and I'll tell you up front that this is the one I have a personal problem with. A group called Meter ran an actual experiment on whether these tools make people faster, which is rarer than you'd expect for something this argued about. 16 experienced developers working on their own real project. 246 real jobs. They flipped a coin on each job. You can use AI for this one, you can't for that one, and then they recorded the screens and timed it. And in early 2025, what they found was that the developers came out slower with the tools than without. When developers are allowed to use AI tools, they take 19% longer to complete issues. Developers expected AI to speed them up by 24%. And even after experiencing the slowdown, they still believed AI had sped them up by 20%. So about a fifth slower. And afterwards, after living through the whole thing, they still thought they'd been a fifth faster. Now, I want to be straight with you here because I'd rather not read you a number I don't believe. I write code and I'm good at it, but these tools make me faster. And it isn't a small difference either. It's a difference between a thing getting finished and a thing sitting there for a month. So when I first read that study, my honest reaction was it had to be wrong somehow. And then I had to sit with the second half of the quote for a minute because the finding is that the people in the study felt exactly the same way I feel, and the stopwatch disagreed with them. So either they caught something real or I'm one more guy who thinks he's fast. But here's the thing, and it's a reason I didn't just cut this part. That study is from early 2025, and almost nobody still quoting it has caught up with what happened next. Meter went back to run it again. They couldn't. We have observed a significant increase in developers choosing not to participate in the study because they do not wish to work without AI. They tried the same experiment on a bigger group, and too many developers turned it down because signing up meant doing half their work the old way. And of the ones who did sign up, somewhere between 30 and 50% told the researchers they were quietly leaving tasks out, the ones they didn't want to face without the tools. So the control group came apart in their hands. Meter says that themselves, which is the reason I still trust them, and I say their newer numbers are probably a floor rather than an answer. We believe it is likely that developers are more sped up from AI tools now in early 2026 compared to our own estimates from early 2025. That puts me back on solid ground. It also gets something the first number never could. You can argue about whether these things save you an hour or cost you one. It's harder to argue with what happened when somebody offered to pay developers $50 an hour to go back to working the old way for a while. And a lot of them said, no thanks. One of them told the researchers that being asked to do it unaided was like being asked to walk across the city where you got used to taking an Uber. Then there's one more line in that government release, and I've been going back and forth about whether to say it, because it's easy to say it dishonestly. They also track how much of everything the country produces ends up going back to the people who did the producing, wages basically, as a share of the whole pie. The labor share was 52.9% in the second quarter of 2026, the lowest level in the series, which begins in the first quarter of 1947. lowest in 79 years of records. Now, here's where I have to be straight with you, because this is exactly the moment where a video like this points at a number and says, AI did that. And it'd feel good, and I can't support it. That agency doesn't say AI caused it. That share has been sliding for decades through a lot of presidents and a lot of technologies, and it was sliding before any of this existed. So I'm not going to tell you AI did it. What I'll tell you is that that's the ground that this is landing on. And that's the trend it's walking into. And if you want one number to keep an eye on over the next years, that's the one I'd watch, not stock prices. So I'll leave you with 3 things that you can go look at yourself. And none of these is me telling you what to do with your money. Number 1, go find out what your retirement money is actually holding. Whatever fund it's in has a page like the one I showed you. It's free, and it lists the top 10 and how big each one is. Most people have never looked once. You might find you're more concentrated than you thought, or you might find you're fine. Either way, you'll know instead of guessing. Number 2, the Census Bureau survey is public. When somebody tells you every business is using AI now, you could go read what that business actually told the government for free, updated every 2 weeks. Number 3, and this is the one I'd actually use most. When somebody tells you what AI is going to do, go find what they said it would do 2 years ago. The old model pages are still up, the old pricing is still up, it's all archived. That habit is worth more than any prediction anybody tells you, including mine, which is why I haven't made one yet. That smoke at the top is still running, by the way. Nobody has to pay anything for it to keep it running. It's on the machine. Whether there's a better one next year, that's a part somebody's paying for. And hey, if you could do me a favor, if you like this kind of content, give it a like and a subscribe. It costs you nothing, and you could always change your mind later on. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.